how to properly argue with yourself.
Here's the question. What's going on inside the minds of top achievers that cause them to make extraordinary breakthroughs both personally and professionally? My name is Tim Shurr, and I invite you to join me as we take a deep dive into the unconscious mind and discover how to transform your biggest dreams into a reality. Welcome to the How to Be Mesmerizing podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. It's Tim Shurr, and today I want to talk with you just for a few minutes about this idea of how to argue with yourself in a way that allows you to actually have more peace and calm in your life. You know, I talk a lot about how the mind works and why it's important to be mindful of our thoughts and what we're thinking pretty much any moment of the day that we're thinking. We should be monitoring what we're focusing on, the story we're telling ourselves, the way that we're interpreting situations, or the way that we are making meaning out of things. Because remember, your mind is basically just making stuff up all the time based on the experience that your mind has. But your mind only has a very small slice of experience. If you compare it to the billions and billions of experiences that others have had on this planet. Remember, your mind can only make sense of things based on what it knows. So let me ask you this. Do you think that your mind knows everything about everything there is to know about everything? I mean, do you really think that your mind knows it all, has seen it all, has experienced it all, is omnipresent, has all the answers and all the experiences that are possible? Because that would make you God. And I'm not quite sure that you're qualified for that position. I know I'm not. And so even though that voice in my head thinks that it does know everything, that voice in my head thinks that it's going to have all the answers, and it's going to be able to predict the future, and it's going to be able to know what's best for me and what's a good idea and what isn't. But I have to remind myself, are you sure? You know, when that fearful voice comes up, or I start to get angry, or I start to get frustrated because something's not going my way, or because somebody's not acting the way that I think they should, and that story begins, I remind myself that I'm actually paying attention to the story that my mind is creating, and that I realize it's a story. And I also realize that I am not the storyteller, because if I was the storyteller, I would just be thinking that, you know, what I'm telling myself is exactly how it is. I wouldn't realize that I could actually step back and view my thoughts. You know, if you can step back and pay attention to the thoughts that you're having, then you're observing the thoughts, right? Well, if you're observing the thoughts, then that means that you're not the thoughts. You're observing them. So let me say this in another way. Have you ever watched a television program, and while you're watching it, you got so absorbed into the program that people might be asking you questions, or have walked in the room and you didn't even realize they were there, or you have no idea what questions they asked you? Or have you ever got so engrossed in the program that it was like you were in the program, or you were feeling what the character was feeling? Like the character was going to feel embarrassed or humiliated, or was going to experience some kind of pain or torture or heartbreak or victory. And you were in there feeling those same feelings or emotions as the character, as though you were going through the journey with them. Well, that's you having this powerful experience. But at the same time, you're not having that experience, right? It's a television program. It's coming through a TV or a screen on the other side of the room. And those people that are portraying that, they're not going through it either. Those are actors. They're going through scenes. None of it's real. But in the moment, it feels real. You can be so engrossed into a show or a movie, and then all of a sudden it ends. And then you're back in the living room again, or you're back in the movie theater again, or you're in the car again, leaving the movie theater going, wow, that was really something. And it's like you popped out of that experience, and it was now separate from you. See, that's kind of how our thoughts are. Our thoughts are like these TV programs or these movies where we feel like we are going through all this stuff when really it's just an interpretation. We have the ability to observe the way that we think, which means that we are not our thoughts. We are the observer of our thoughts, which means that our brain or our mind is creating these thoughts, these ideas, based on its experiences from the past. Yet there's another part of us that can have a higher level of awareness of that and decide that we don't have to be a slave to our past or to our past responses or past conditioning. We can rise above it, and we can literally do it in a moment. We can have an awareness and shift in a moment. That is extraordinary. So that must mean that there is something separate. We must be separate. Our consciousness, our spirit must be separate from this mind or this brain, because we are able to experience the thoughts. Have you ever had, and I hope that you're with me on this, I know that it sounds like you're suddenly in college in some kind of philosophy class. I am, because I think I am, right? But really, if you think about it, have you ever had the experience of observing a situation and then observing yourself, observing the situation at the same time? Now, I know it's a little trippy, and I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I have. I'm literally like in an experience, realizing that I'm having this experience. It's so weird, right? I don't even know how to explain it unless you've had that experience yourself. So you're either going, yeah, that's weird, I've had that too, or you're going, I have no idea what you're talking about. but it's this idea that what's another example? Another example of this is like deja vu. Have you ever been in a situation where you literally felt like you've been in that situation before, where you actually had this idea that you knew what the person you're talking to was going to say, and you knew what your response was, and then that person would literally say what you were expecting them to say, and then you would just say what you were supposed to say next, almost like you're reading lines in a scene. I've had that happen too, and it's weird. And I have no idea what that means or how to even explain it. But what I do know is that once you're observing the mind, you're no longer a slave to it. You're like connecting with your higher power, your higher wisdom, your higher consciousness. And I think that's often why people meditate. It's because you're sitting still, paying attention to what your mind is doing. And in doing that, you're recognizing that you are separate from your mind. You're separate from the thoughts. You are the thinker of the thoughts, but you are not the thoughts. And sometimes you can separate yourself from thinking of the thoughts, right? It's like this other level where you're literally realizing that your mind is creating these thoughts, and then you're paying attention to these thoughts and then deciding whether you want to use them or not, whether you want to apply them or not, whether you want to emotionally respond to them or not. So I'm driving down the road, and this gentleman or whoever it is in front of me is going about 10 miles slower than I think they should be. And I'm in a hurry trying to get somewhere. And then all of a sudden I'm having this awareness that I don't have to be in a hurry. And this person can drive any way they want. And I don't have to respond with frustration or angst. And I can respond any way I want. And that's a different experience of life than how it used to be for me. Because in the past, I wasn't thinking about my thinking. I was basically just going through life reacting. I would not stop and think, hey, you have a choice in whether you get frustrated or not. But I didn't feel like that was a choice at the time. I felt like I was responding the way that any normal person would respond, which of course is a false belief. because there's plenty of people that would have no problem with someone driving slower, then they drive slower too. Or they might have a lot of empathy for the person. Maybe it's an older person and they can't see real well, and I don't want to ride their tail and flash my brights on them, because that's just causing more stress on them and also putting them and myself at risk, right? There's so many different ways. They might have just come back from a really traumatic experience and they need to just slow down and get a grip. We don't know, right? And so we have so many different ways that we can come across. But I never knew that. I never realized that. I thought that I was just experiencing what life was, and this is reality, right? This is just reality. And all these people that would talk about this positive thinking, they were just full of it, right? They were just looking at ways to try to lie to themselves so that they didn't have to deal with the facts. And I get it that sometimes people who are using positive thinking or just pretending that everything's okay, might be using that strategy. It's denial, or what they call distraction. In my book, The Power of Optimism, I said there's 4 types of attitudes. And they were the dreamer, the optimist, the troubleshooter, and the pessimist. And the dreamer was someone who had their heads in the clouds, but their feet weren't on the ground. And so they weren't really being practical. They were just always assuming everything was going to be okay without doing anything to make sure that it was going to be okay, right? And so, in many ways, I tried to do that for a long time. I tried to distract myself from those uncomfortable feelings. But over the years of trying to get better at mastering my thoughts and my mind, which I am by far not a master of it, but I keep striving to be in charge of my thoughts in the present moment at all times. And in practicing doing this, I've become more and more aware that our mind is separate from our consciousness, right? That we are separate from our thoughts. And if we can be separate from our thoughts, that means we're not our thoughts. It means we are the experiencer of our thoughts. And that means if we are the experiencer of our thoughts, then we have the ability to shift them. We have the ability to upgrade them. We have the ability to change how we, what kind of thoughts we support, what kind of thoughts we don't. And the mind, because it's always learning, because the brain in many ways is a machine, it's always learning. A lot of times the mind will adapt. If it notices that we are focusing more on a certain way of thinking, on certain subjects, if we are used to feeling certain feelings, it will tend to lean in that direction, right? So if you surround yourself with positive, uplifting people and messages and podcasts and seminars and experiences, then you're going to lean more towards having those thoughts, feelings, emotions, and experiences in your life. If you are used to stressful situations, stressful people, stressful messages and programming, then your mind is probably going to lean in that direction more because that's what it's used to. And once again, if we recognize this, then we can strategically, tactically surround ourselves with positive people and information, and it will cause us to feel happier and more excited and more empowered in our life. This is a choice. Now, B.F. Skinner, who was a famous behavior modification advocate, he said that human beings are basically just robots, and we have these programmed, conditioned responses, and we're always trying to avoid pain, and we're always trying to create pleasure, and that's really the only thing that drives us. And that's false, right? Now, a lot of what he said with behavior modification is definitely accurate, but I've talked about this in other podcasts before, that we will on purpose experience pain if we think it's going to create more pleasure. So we're not always trying to just avoid pain. Sometimes we will purposely go there if we feel like we have a mission, right? Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "It's amazing how grown men will die for ribbons," right? It wasn't the ribbons, it was the idea of what those ribbons meant. Courage, honor, valor, dying for something worthy, protecting your country, protecting the person next to you, defending your family. right? So it was the values that we would purposely do what our brain would absolutely not want us to do, which is to die, right? But people would go into battle anyway. And some people have a belief that, dying in battle is the only way to die, and it's the most honorable way. And so again, your consciousness can override your brain. Your consciousness can override your fear and those negative thoughts that might constantly be plaguing you. And so the goal is to be aware of your thoughts, constantly ask yourself, is this what I really want to believe? And begin to become aware that your thoughts are just random ideas and bits of information that are flowing into your mind, and you have the ability to grab a hold of it and decide what you're going to do with this. And you have so many emotional responses that you can choose from. You do not have to choose stress or anger or frustration. Regardless of what happens, regardless of what somebody says or does, you are independent of that. You have the ability to choose. Now, I know that a lot of times we respond just out of programming from the past. It's an automatic habit. It feels like people push our buttons and we just go. But you do have the ability to break that. You do have the ability to install a new way of being and a new emotional response. And so this week, I want you to continue focusing on being mindful of what it is you're saying to yourself, what you're focusing on, how you're interpreting things. And your emotions are your body's feedback mechanism. So if you start to feel stressed or angry or overwhelmed or scared or upset or whatever it may be, overwhelmed, resentful, whatever it is, that's your body's way of getting your attention. It's the only way your body knows to get your attention is to make you feel that way. And of course, when you're feeling peaceful, joyful, happy, content, loving, giving, grateful, then that's your body's way of telling you that your thinking's probably on track, right? And so it's just feedback either way. So be mindful of the thoughts that you're having and decide that you're going to, whatever situation shows up in your life, you're going to take a step back and you're going to think for a second, what is the outcome that I want? What emotional responses do I have before me? And what would make me feel the best right now and afterwards? And when you start thinking in this way, you're going to find yourself feeling a lot stronger, much more in control, and much more confident now and when you think about your future. So put these thoughts into action. Thanks so much for listening, and make today a sure success.
Hey, would you like more free tips on how to be a mesmerizing leader? Then check out mesmerizingleadership.com and also hang out with me on Facebook, facebook.com/Tim Shurr. Thanks so much, and make your day a sure success.